Therapists of Reddit, what's the most common and overlooked mental damages that a child gets from the way parents, classmates, etc. treat them? 20 years as a therapist, and a good number of those as the clinical director of children's and adolescent residential facilities. I would say parental inconsistencies. Kiddos want to know if they repeat a behavior, good or bad. The response from the parent should be the same. Inconsistencies create anxieties. Therapist here, and I'd say instilled shame in your child by calling names, putting them down, being overly critical, etc. Of course it's a continuum, but if a child is shamed too much and too often, sometimes that can result in them thinking they don't deserve to be happy, they don't deserve to be treated with respect. And a person that doesn't care about themselves is a very dangerous person. Therapist here, not making discipline about the child and making it about the parent's own ego anger. I see this a lot. People who punish their child with the goal it seems to make them cry, not to teach. It turns into this battle where the parent seems to feel if their kid isn't despondent, then they don't learn that what they did was wrong. Therapist here. Physical abuse is horrid, but it's the emotional abuse, gaslighting, passive aggression, shaming, that can truly frick children up. You don't have to agree with everything your child does, but there's a massive difference between demonstrating that a behavior is bad versus the child is bad. I was well into adulthood when I realized my dad was a bad parent and that emotional and verbal abuse was still abuse. I thought that just because my dad never hit me, I was overreacting when I got upset after he called me names. In my area, it is the pressure of constantly needing to succeed in everything or be considered a failure. Half of my child clients are in that mindset of if I don't get A's my parents will be upset and I will never amount to anything in my life. Then as they get older they burn out and become suicidal when they can't meet parents' expectations. When your 13-year-old has trouble staying awake and says they don't wanna live anymore cause it's too hard, please look into potential medical conditions rather than shaming them for trying to seek attention. I'm a therapist and former teacher who works with kids with autism. The most frustrating one for me was dealing with parents who lost their crap whenever they saw their kids stimming. When I taught, I had a few parents who were adamant that their kids stopped flapping their hands because they didn't want them to look autistic. Their kids managed to suppress the hand flapping, but would instead bite themselves or scratch themselves to get similar sensory input. It was really heartbreaking to see kids with permanent scar tissue on their hands because of their parents' egos. While I would never call it child abuse, my dad messed me up fairly permanently by trying to help me with my math homework. In grade 1-3, ages 6-8 in Australia, I remember being pretty okay at math, even winning a small award for something at one point. But when I started getting homework it all went downhill from there. Dad would go through the problems with me, but if I didn't get the answer straight away he would get incredibly frustrated with me. His tone of voice would change and instead of gentle encouragement I got exasperation. It got to the point where if I didn't know the answer I would just sit there and stare at the equation. Then I started doing this in class too, especially if there was a test and the room was silent. I was so frightened of asking for help that I would just sit paralyzed until I started to cry. This has affected me into my adult life. I've tried to go to university but the course I chose had a very basic chemistry class I had to pass in the first year. I've attempted it 4 times and failed or pulled out due to panic attacks and stress. I aced the other units, just can't get past that one. I love my dad, but I'm also very resentful of him for giving me a lifelong fear of asking for help. Lack of positive encouragement and affection. I see this one a lot. Children that I see will often have low self-esteem, not bother trying in anything, etc. because the only time their accomplishments are acknowledged is when they do something wrong. I once worked with a girl who was an amazing artist, but would paint very infrequently and never show her work to her parents. Apparently every time she'd shared it with them they would pick it apart and point out all the flaws without complimenting anything. She's a great artist, but thinks she's not because her parents never encourage her. This applied to other aspects of her life as well. The sad part is most of their parents don't even realize they're doing it. Even if your kid isn't perfect by your standards, positive encouragement still goes a long way. Not a therapist, but studying to be a therapist. Social interaction is incredibly important, especially for children when they're learning how to navigate social fields. And a lot of kids who get excluded for being shy or weird end up having a lot of mental health problems later on because they think no one likes them and they don't deserve friends. I think sometimes we just need to be less judgmental of each other and more willing to include people. Anytime a child is invalidated, that is, stop crying. You're being overdramatic, it's not that bad. Think of the children in Africa who have it worse than you, etc. This is a breeding ground of all sorts of difficulties in later life, like low self-esteem, anger, being an abused target, inability to self-regulate emotions, and many more issues. It breaks my heart and frustrates me at the same time. Again, the omnipotent all-curing speech about the goddamned kids in fricking Africa. Counselor here, telling them that something is very easy and they should just be able to do it. It's a common frustration reaction for parents in hard situations. Schoolwork is so easy, doing chores is so easy, etc. It invalidates the heck out of the kids and they feel incapable of doing anything since they can't do the easy stuff. Especially when the barrier isn't that they can't do it, but that there's some executive function getting in the way, like they can't initiate it or they can't sustain attention long enough to do it. If someone isn't doing something easy, there's a reason, and it's usually possible to figure out what it is and how to get past it if you take the time to look. One big thing that really made me hate my dad growing up, and just one thing of many items today, is that he would be a pose at home, but treat strangers with the utmost friendly performance and interest, arguing with my mother with his short fuse, ignoring me and my sister trying to talk to him like we didn't exist, embarrassing us in public and at home because he's a pig. It never mattered to him. It made me sick when I heard him one time call a place multiple times to leave a heart-spilling good review of some customer service person, but always find a flaw in any kind of work I try to show him, and never a compliment. He calls himself a Christian, but it sure doesn't seem like he follows any of the teachings, more like he just wants to avoid getting spit roasted. Speaking from experience, no parent should ever compare their child to another. I was always compared to other kids doing better than me to try and teach me how to be like them. It puts your kids down and chances are they'll carry that habit into adulthood. I'm an adolescent, but hey, I still compare myself to others and get extremely jealous due to it. It just teaches you that you're worse than everybody else. Having them kiss or hug someone is a cute way of saying hello or goodbye to someone, even to people the kid doesn't know that well. You can mostly see the kid isn't comfortable with it, but a lot of parents force them to. I hate seeing that. We should instead learn our kids that they're the boss of their own body. Like, waving to someone is also a good way of greeting. Being treated as older than they are, or having expectations on them that are higher than is developmentally appropriate. That means allowing them to watch or experience things that are beyond their understanding, talking to them like adults, expecting them to do things too young, like reading and writing, punishing for things that are natural like short attention spans and needing to move, and expecting them to understand social cues that kids just don't get yet. Kids can start feeling like they're never good enough. They mimic or pick up maladaptive behaviors. They don't fit in with peers because their peers don't have the same knowledge base as they do. They learn to lie to cover for themselves. Kids who are parentified have to take care of their younger siblings, grow up far too quickly and often feel abandoned and unworthy of attention or care themselves. Kids can actually get PTSD from watching scary movies before they're old enough to understand that they're not real. Kids who are considered adults in courts or by police officers are being mistreated because their brains are not as developed and they are not capable of reasoning like an adult. One of the scariest to me is parents who have no problem with their teens' marijuana use and even encourage it in adults. Yes, it's not a huge deal, but it can induce schizophrenia in teens. People need to understand that kids are not adults. Abused kid here. The worst thing I experienced was treating the relationship with your kid as a business relationship. My dad used to say, file your report when I'd come home as if I was an employee. Show your kids you love them and that there is an emotional spiritual bond there. Even just saying that you love them and want the best for them goes an extremely long way. Not a therapist, but a case manager in social services. The most damaging thing that I have seen is when a parent primary caretaker is extremely unstable in crisis etc. and relies on their child to take care of them. This is often in the form of emotional support. A kid neglects their emotional space and gives it all to the parent. They sacrifice their childhood and they build their entire identity on who the parent needs them to be. They believe that if they are good then their parent will be happy and okay, while if they are bad their parent will be upset and unpredictable. So advice to parents, if you are going through a difficult time, divorce, mental health, addiction, etc., get help by finding appropriate resources. This might mean swallowing pride and seeing a therapist or going into a treatment program. Do not rely on your children. Show up for them and remember that they are often experiencing pain, sadness for similar reasons that you are and even more intensely. Your job is to protect them and love them without conditions. I'm not a therapist, but I've seen my fair share. Do not compare your child to another child. Tell them they were unplanned and wanted a mistake. Hit your children in anger. Hit them period. Tell them compliment sandwiches. You are very sweet. You fricked up your spelling test because you don't listen. But I know you're better than this or you never freaking listen to me. You're smart kid. But goddamn you pee me off. Abandon your children, pawn them off on other family. Disappear for days or weeks. Bring multiple partners around them regularly. Take no interest in their hobbies. Call them crazy. Swear they need medication rather than discipline them. Blame them for ruining your life. I can be at this for days. Don't be my mother. She was a monster and now she gets to pretend to have done such a good job with us. I'd rather eat my left hand than let my son be alone in her company. I need more therapy to work through all the damage she's put on me, but that's expensive and a rant for another day. My mom is about a size 4-6, really healthy, and eats well. She constantly tells me how she thinks she's fat and now I've noticed that I keep calling myself fat. I'm not overweight, and that's something I think I got from her. My mom did the same thing when I was growing up. I struggled with anorexia for a year when I was 14. I still live with the mentality but I don't let it control my eating habits anymore. I vowed with my daughter not to talk about myself like that in front of her and to work on loving myself so I don't negatively influence her that way. Like others have mentioned, psychological maltreatment, emotional neglect, name calling, etc. is much more harmful, in the long run, than physical abuses. Obviously physical abuse is harmful to a child, but psychological abuse can lead to more long-term effects, and is associated with things like PTSD and borderline personality disorder, to name a few. My mom let her boyfriend, abuse herself and I for years emotionally and physically. When she found out it was sexual she still went back to them. The rest of my family has the sweep it under the rug and move on mindset. They resent me for not having my life together. I seriously wonder how much of my issues are a chemical imbalance versus my upbringing. My therapist says sometimes chemical imbalances are caused by upbringing. Not a therapist, but I do know that people don't take anxiety seriously sometimes, like people think it's an excuse sometimes, so people just brush it off as a phase. It's not a phase, Chris, so stop poking me with that dang fuzzy pencil. My parents don't seem to think anxiety or depression exists. An advert would appear on TV about depression, anxiety, and they'd be like, just stop feeling sorry for yourself, dimwit, and I find that very awful. I haven't been diagnosed with anything like that, but several friends of mine have, and they certainly aren't just feeling sorry for themselves. Actual victim here. Don't force your child into religion, and especially don't make them act in accordance to religious rules. I dealt with that for 2 whole years. On the flip side, don't force them to not be religious either, if that is what they want to be. You should not force them to believe anything, but you should inform them of the many ways of thinking out there and support whatever they believe, within reason, of course. Therapist. Ignoring your children because of your own selfish crap will frick them up. Spend time with them even when you think you would rather do something else. That said, I have a 3-year-old. She is a great child, yet it's almost impossible to avoid things that will stick with her, yelling at her, taking away toys and having her cry, etc. I'm not perfect and no parent should think doing something they've done is going to frick their child up forever. I consistently show her love and she is sitting in my lap as I write this. So we're buds. The damage comes from the inconsistency and terror kids get made to feel. Honestly, I feel bad for many abusive parents. They've got so many stresses that the normal behavior of children tosses them over the edge. All these terrible things that people are writing about are their only ways of coping with the little monsters. There are only a few who are truly doing the abuse on purpose. Those cases are super fricked too. Not a therapist, but when parents and families say to kids acting up in public, stop. Those people are laughing at you, or that person is looking at you. In my honest opinion, that was the biggest driver of my social anxiety. I struggle now to even walk past people. Therapist here. In my experience, the worst but extremely common damage is done when kids don't feel unconditional love from their parents. Affection and attention that depends on good behavior undermines the feeling of self-love, because kids always think that it is their fault when parents don't love them, and they conclude that they are not worthy of love. This results in tons of problems in later life, especially in relationships. Kids really need to feel loved even when they act out or do stupid things. That doesn't mean that parents shouldn't correct bad behaviors, but in a respectful way. Just leaving your infant to cry for too long without tending to them can frick them up for life. Some people think that the correct way to parent is to leave them on their own to cry it out, self-soothe, but it's just a bad idea. Infancy is when children develop their attachment patterns. Ideally, they are supposed to have secure attachments to their parents' caregivers, to the point where they look for them if they are upset and become anxious if left without them. Babies cry in order to get the attention of their caregiver, who then comes and holds them, feeds them, etc. When parents ignore these cries, the babies become conditioned to think that their crying has no result, and they no longer cry when something is wrong, because they are not expecting any help. This might not seem like that big of a deal, but the type of attachment that an infant forms affects their relationships for the rest of their life. If they do not have a secure attachment, they can have trouble ever sharing their emotions, trusting, and becoming close with anyone else, as well as just having higher levels of anxiety. Having different standards for kids and making it obvious which you prefer. I assume the majority of parents don't notice they are doing it, but the kids sure as heck do. Not a therapist, but this is how I grew up. Don't argue, yell at your co-parent in front within hearing of the kid's, or talk bad about them or anyone for that matter, to or around them, either, unless that person is really bad news. I mostly see parents who nag, complain, yell rather than implement tangible consequences, place children's wants needs above their own consistently, and let them play Call of Duty Grand Theft Auto Fortnite at 5 years old. Not a therapist, but a parent that has done an ungodly amount of research after having my own child and being a product of divorce myself. I wanted to break the cycle. It starts from a young age. Letting a child cry it out floods the brain with cortisol and can cause irreparable damage. Trying not to yell in front of baby, even when they're asleep. Babies from homes with a lot of conflict displayed increased stress levels when they were exposed to angry tones of voice. This can cause more anxious adults who will have a hard time regulating emotions. I could go on and on, but people really underestimate a baby's brain and how sponge-like they really are. I can vividly remember having arguments with my girlfriend in very cheery tones, though forced smiles, in front of our kid when she was still an infant. We were crammed into a one-bedroom for a while, so we had to make sure to keep the right vibe. 100% the biggest thing is loud noise while being angry. If either of my parents had a bad day at work, they would come home angry and start banging pots around or aggressively emptying the dishwasher, etc. I now start to stress when a roommate puts a pot down too hard or slams a door. I haven't lived at home for 4 years. I automatically associate sudden bangs with angry. It's ruined me. Not a therapist, but don't tell your kid that they're not allowed to have an opinion because they don't pay rent. Don't try and force them to respect you because you change their diapers or you're their parents. Don't force them to talk to you. Don't dismiss things they tell you if it doesn't align perfectly with your perspective. And don't treat them both their age and younger than they are. I can tell you from personal experience this will freak up your child in some way, whether you see it or not. Not telling them I love you because they should just know it's true. In our house, my wife and I have an understanding: if we are wrong, promptly admit it and apologize. We have found as the kids get older that they do the same thing. This is a second marriage for both of us. When we got married I had a 16-year-old boy and 8-year-old daughter. Wife's daughters were 12 and 17. Both of our previous marriages were highly dysfunctional. We try to set an example of what a functional partnership marriage is like now. From my work as a therapist, I would say dismissing kids' feelings and or concerns when the adult in question doesn't know what to do or doesn't want to deal with it. I cannot count the number of times I saw grown but people, teachers, parents, social workers, turn on a dime in response to kids being honest about bad situations in their lives based entirely on how the adult was feeling, and not based on what was best for the child. Trying to minimize a child's feelings or worries because you, the adult, feel ill-equipped or tired or whatever, is unacceptable to me. On days when I am feeling overwhelmed like that, when one of the children in my life needs something and I don't know what to do or can't think and it's not an emergency, I just tell them the truth. I am glad you told me this, but I need a minute because I am tired, or whatever. 9 times out of 10, because I am consistent with all the children I know, not yet a parent, can't afford the expense but love kids and worked with them more than half my life, they accept that answer and wait. Only time it hasn't worked is when they are overtired or cranky or something along those lines. I cannot and will not accept the idea that adults who have chosen to be responsible for children's welfare in any capacity have the right to dump their problems on kids. Do your freaking job or leave it. When I was in kindergarten I was yelled at for a small mistake for hours by the same teacher. I ended up peeing and pooping myself which got me yelled at more. I was doing a reading exercise and guess what, now I have a stutter, issues trusting teachers, and a few other things probably. Not a therapist, but was an emotionally abused kid. My dad used to joke a lot, except these jokes were him telling me someone had died or that I was in serious trouble. I would be out hanging with friends as a young teen and he would text my phone to say you're in big trouble. I'd ask why. He would respond with you know why. I start to panic, try and think if I have done something wrong. He would leave me to stew for 20 minutes or so and then text being like haha joking. Except sometimes I was in trouble so I could never tell if this was a joke or if I was in for a severe bollocking when I got home. Therapist here. The mental health of the people involved in the development process of children, parents, teachers, other caretakers, etc. is one of the great pillars of the future mental health of the children. When an adult have a good mental health, they can overcome mostly every stressful situation that they encounter in raising a child. And with children almost everything is stressful, with care and respect for others and themselves. And that is the best teaching that you can give. So please, if you need help, seek help now. Even if you think that it's not important. If you feel bad, it's always bad enough to get help. Talk to those around you. Get away from toxic environments. Make time for yourself. If all listed before seems impossible to do, find a professional to help you get there. Taking care of yourself is the best way to protect the children around you. Not a therapist, but personally one of the most damaging things was as a child my mother treated me as an adult and got extremely frustrated whenever I had kid problems or did something a kid would do in a situation. One extreme example is when my first dog died. I bawled and my mother tried to logically explain it to me, and when I wouldn't stop crying she yelled at me to grow up and slammed my door. To this day I've noticed myself a lot more cold to the world and hard to genuinely get invested in people's emotions, lives, and others. I love my mother, but I resent her for a lot of my problems I face now. This is the goodest fly boy. He will bring you 10 years of happiness in exchange for a like on this video. Like and subscribe, you magnificent person.